Afternoon, everybody. Uneducated Economist here. So in today's video, we will be talking about the lumber industry and how it predicted the chaos that we are now experiencing within the economy. Now, I've been saying it for many years now that you need to follow the lumber industry. The things that you are seeing taking place in lumber futures, lumber demand, and lumber production is going to be very telling about what it is that's going to be taking place throughout the rest of the economy. I had people telling me that I was absolutely delusional and that the lumber industry is no way of being able to predict what is taking place throughout the rest of the economy. And I very much disagree. And I believe that my predictions of what has taken place not only within the lumber industry, but then within the economy itself are very accurate in coming to fruition. So when lumber was at its all-time high at 1,700 per thousand and people were screaming inflation, hyperinflation, money printer causing the lumber prices to go up, I was one of the very few people out there, if not the only one on YouTube, saying, what are you going to say when lumber prices come back down to their normal price? Because this is more about a supply chain breakdown than it is about money printer causing lumber prices to move up as dramatically as they did. So now here we are. Just under 600 per thousand. Lumber prices are essentially what they were back in 2018. I mean, we're talking 7 years ago, 7+ years ago. Lumber futures are at the same price as they were 7 years ago. So now when I say that lumber is a very good indicator of what has taken place throughout the rest of the economy, I'm sticking to that. We saw lumber prices come down. Did they come down to the normal price? Well, what is normal? I mean, people would have anticipated normal being somewhere around 300 per thousand. But when you think about over the course of history, how far the lumber prices have moved from 1,700 down to 400 or 500 per thousand, and the mill operation really not profitable under 550 per thousand, 600 per thousand is normal. Like, this is a very normal price, something we had experienced 7 years ago. The demand for lumber is very low, so the production of it is not, very high. So when you look at the lumber prices being at 600 per thousand, to me, this is a good price. This is not bad. The demand for it is low. If you're looking for lumber, now's the time that you would want to buy it. But when you think about the demand for lumber being low, that is not a good sign in the economy. The demand for lumber being high, that would be a good sign. Right? You think about the activity that takes place from new construction itself. How many subcontractors are involved, how many suppliers are involved, and then all the residual that comes from it. I mean, you think about it, like I have a fairly decent project that's taking place right across the street from the lumberyard that I work at. Most of the people who are working on that particular job are not necessarily from this area. So now they're staying at hotels, they're eating at restaurants, they're shopping at the stores around here. There's a lot of residual that comes from the new construction industry, not just from the building itself, but then from all the extras that happen from the crew being there, from the suppliers coming in and providing material for that particular area. There's a lot of residual that comes from the new construction. And when you see new construction slowing down, that is a bad sign for the economy. When new construction is ramping up, that's a good sign for the economy. So now when I think about what it is that's taken place with new home construction, like the new home builders, the sentiment is very negative. In fact, the worst part about it is buyer traffic. Like people who are coming to buy new homes, the sentiment on buyer traffic for new home builders is so negative right now that in order to make it positive, you would have to have an extreme change to the condition of the market right now. In order to have that extreme change, you would have to see something completely different that is taking place with not only interest rates, but activity within the economy itself that would give people the confidence to go out there and participate, to buy that house knowing that they're going to have enough business to make the payments on it, or that it won't go down in value if they were to buy it today, or even try and build it today. Like the lack of confidence that has taken place right now is overwhelming, and it's evident within the lumber industry. Now, here's an example of how I know the lumber industry is the best industry to look at. It's difficult if you're not an insider like I am. Now, I work retail and I work at a mom and pop lumber yard. I do retail sales for a living, but I have contacts with wholesalers, distributors, retailers. I live in the Pacific Northwest, so I'm in the middle of lumber country, right? There's plenty of loggers, mill operations, truck drivers. There's no corner of this market that I cannot see. So when I look at the lumber demand being incredibly low, I see evidence of it in real time, firsthand. I'll give you an example. I did a project the last week, and it was the end of the month. I call up looking for pricing on a pretty decent size order. The order involved a couple of units of 2x6, 16-foot standard and better, and some 2x8. So I call up to get updated pricing so I can give the best price on these units of lumber. Whether it was the end of the month or they just had extra units or whatever it was, they gave me a price that was about 40 per thousand under spot price. So now I'm looking at like the current futures price at 600 per thousand, and I'm getting quotes coming in at 560, right, under. So they're desperate to either move the material, or they have an abundance of it, or they just need the money or whatever. The price of it was much cheaper than I had anticipated. I'm glad I called to get that updating prices. I was able to put my fair markup on it, offer him a really good deal. He snapped up that really good deal, gave me the money. We're delivering that material as we speak right now. So this all took place over the course of the last week. If you were to take in the understanding of where lumber prices are today through news, through the mainstream media, or through the narrative that has taken place out there, you would believe that lumber is incredibly high. In fact, you'll probably see arguments within the comments section right now talking about how there's high lumber prices. This is very incorrect. Nothing could be further from the truth. Right now is really cheap lumber prices, and that is a reflection of the lack of demand that has taken place out there. This is a sign. This is a bad sign. This isn't a good sign. This is a bad sign. And although it was a really good order for me and I was able to profit from it, and everybody is like singing a happy song right now, doing the happy dance because we're all, doing business and making money at it. The idea that this lumber price came in as low as it did is a sign that there is not a lot of demand out there and that they are trying to push product, trying to move it through the system. Again, bad signs of what has taken place within the economy. Now I'm watching the lumber, I'm watching not only the lumber futures, but I'm watching the home builder demand, because that is going to be the indicator. When you see home buyer traffic turn positive on the builder sentiment, this is going to be a very small indication, right? It's not, you got interest rates, you got, mortgage demands, you got all these things that you can look at. There is this one tiny little indicator, right? Home builder sentiment, the buyer traffic. When that turns positive, when that thing turns positive, you are going to see the demand for lumber explode. And I don't believe that there is enough production taking place within the industry right now to supply a significant increase in demand. Now, we're nowhere near that. We're nowhere near it. So I can't imagine that there's going to be a ramping up of production to meet a demand that isn't there. I'm witnessing here at the beginning of summer, where we should be seeing the most demand for lumber taking place right now, going into the building season. This is the time that you would want to frame your buildings together, put your house together so that it can be dried in by the end of summer so you can work on the interior during the winter. This is a very common tactic, very common strategy. I mean, you could build houses all year long. It doesn't matter when you start a house, you can do them all year long. But when the weather is better, you're going to have a much easier time framing that house together in better weather than you do during the winter time. So now is the time that you would want to start the project, and there is not a lot of demand happening. I mean, just that order alone is a huge indicator to me of what has taken place, not only within the demand for lumber, but then within the economy itself. Having a low demand for lumber is a sign that people are not very active within the economy. They are, I mean, even just something as simple as building new shelves for the garage, right? Like these type of projects, I'm a witness to see where these are either ramping up or slowing down. And I can tell you right now, there's not a lot of demand for remodeling There's not a lot that's taken place for the chicken coop or the woodshed or anything like that. These projects are very well suppressed. And I can only assume it's due to the fact that the people have an elevated inflation expectations that is happening within the lumber industry, believing that lumber prices were high. I mean, how many people were convinced, absolutely convinced, let's put these dice up, that the Canadian tariffs on lumber were going to send lumber prices to the moon? How many suppliers out there actually increased their lumber prices in anticipation of the tariffs that never occurred? All those people had to back away from that in order to be able to be competitive again, right? This is what's happening within the economy. When they push this fear, uncertainty, and doubt, then people have a tendency to listen to it and then react to that fear, uncertainty, and doubt, not knowing the reality of the situation. I mean, I was out here on my channel the entire time that the credible threat of tariffs was put on, on the Canadian lumber coming into the United States, and I was trying to tell everybody to chill out, that it's not what they think it is. People told me I was wrong, how wrong I was, and that time would tell. Here it is. Time has gone by. There's no tariff on Canadian lumber. Prices are low, being very suppressed. There is no major increase to the cost of new construction through the lumber prices. It didn't happen. And I tried to warn people of that they are not viewing the lumber industry correctly. Now, being in the lumber industry as long as I have, I know that my communication about it, my understanding of it, my viewpoint of it is very different from a lot of other people's out there, but it is by far the most accurate. I've come out here on YouTube time and time and time again over the last 7-8 years, proving that the lumber industry is not only one of the best indicators of the economy, but that the uneducated economist has it dialed in better than anybody else does. All right, let's go and look at some of these statements and comments that we have here. All right, most of the lumber in America comes from America. Canadian lumber is less than 10% of the supply. Michael, I agree that we do produce most of the lumber that we consume here in the United States is domestically supplied, but I'm thinking it's closer to 80%, and that 20% of it, or 20 to 25%, is imported. And of that 20 to 25%, 80% of that comes from Canada. So there's a good significant amount, and I believe it's higher than 10%, but it's not like overwhelming. It's not overwhelming the supply, All right, a person from Portland, Oregon that thinks Trump is a madman. What a shocker. I don't know where you got that from, but I mean, if you want to assume that from the things that I just said in this video, it really says a lot more about you than it does me. All right. Maybe you were talking about another comment. I don't know. All right, I got it dialed into, got me Sabian dialed in full blast, writing it to the Uneducated Economist and Duran on my radio. All right, a lot of builds in Panhandle going on, mostly multi-condo, lots of doors, no yards, etc. And and it's not a matter of the view that you have or the view that I have in my area, right? It's like, that's not the point. You have to look at the lumber demand, you have to look at new home builder sentiment, and you have to look at permit issuance and new starts. All these things are on a downward trajectory, every one of them. I could look across the street and see a huge project that has taken place, medical clinic, right? It's massive. It's this huge project. Right over here is the Maritime Museum, another massive expansion to the museum. If I was to walk down the road a little ways, I could go to the hospital and see a massive expansion of the hospital. Go down to the other end of town, there's a huge apartment complex that is going in. There's another addition to apartment complex going on up on the hill. Lots and lots of projects that are going on here, but not a lot of residential individual home builds. Different, huge difference. All right. All right. Lumber versus metal studs. I don't get a whole lot of demand for metal studs. I mean, there is a lot more in the commercial side of things than they are on the residential. I have never heard him say anything that leads me to think he hates Trump. I don't. That's why. Here's the thing that most people misunderstand about my view when it comes to Trump, when it came to Biden, I didn't have enough respect for Biden to listen to a single word that he ever said. I made it 4 years without ever listening to a single word the president said, because really nothing that he said was coherent or valuable information, right? However, I did have enough respect to listen to Trump, and the things that he says I'm going to criticize, because I believe that the things that he is doing needs to be criticized, considering that the credible threat theory is very well being played out much on the things that he is saying on the credible threats of tariffs, and the idea that he was trying to push something that is going to benefit the people. I find a very delusional belief, right? That doesn't mean that I think he's doing a bad job, right? It doesn't. Again, I didn't have enough respect for Biden to listen to him, but I did have enough respect for Trump to listen to him. And if I criticize him, it means that I've been listening, all right? I don't hate Trump either. He is a con man, marketing genius. Holding the administration under your thumb, to be honest with you, I do not believe for a second that anybody within the government has my best interest in mind. They do not care anything. Here's the problem that I face to begin with, is that somebody who claims to be a constitutionalist and then says, oh, I need to be in charge of the Federal Reserve, is acting unconstitutionally. Right? As a constitutionalist who believes in personal freedoms and liberty, I don't appreciate or like the idea that we have a central banking system within this country. And I certainly don't want a president to say, oh, I hate the Fed, I should be in charge of it, and knowing that's an unconstitutional act. Right? This is the problem that I now face. Don't tell me that you're a constitutionalist, that you believe in the Constitution, that you vote, put your hand on, swear to uphold and protect the Constitution, and then meanwhile say, oh, we need to keep this central banking system up in operation. Or that they're not doing it right, but I could do it better, right? If an individual says that, they are not a constitutionalist. So therefore, I don't believe that they have my best interest in mind. They do not act constitutionally, and therefore, I just don't believe that they're going to do anything that's going to be in my best interest. I will agree with establishing a national language. Other nations do it. Your nuanced political standing really boosts my confidence in this channel. Well, whatever. I mean, it's not about politics, so whether or not you agree or disagree with my political view, it's really inconsequential when it comes to understanding your economy, right? Because your economy could be built off of the political moves. You might have positioned yourself that if there was anything that happens within politics, it really affects your life. You may have positioned yourself for it. So therefore, the political arena is very important to you. I didn't do that, right? I don't position myself to be I didn't position myself to be at consequence of somebody else's decision. The consequences that I pay are from my own decision, based on the information that I have received. If I put my expectations on success or failure on somebody else, I guarantee you I will fail every time. I cannot put my expectations of success or failure on somebody else, especially that of an administration. DJT and Enron must are saving America. All right. I know people who made student loan forgiveness decisions, 150K loans that are no longer forgivable. They are not doing well about it, and I'm worried, but I told them it was a bad idea. All right. Cantillon explained politicians well hundreds of years ago, and the current behavior still fits his model. Oh, I totally agree. In fact, how much time do we have left here? Okay, I got a few minutes here. Let's go read what Cantillon said about that. I mean, because it's actually a pretty good statement that he said. Let me see if I could find it here real quick. Those who haven't read Cantillon's essay, you really should take the time to read it. Now, you can go and find the essay down in the links of this description of this video. I don't know if I put it in this video, but previous videos, you can go and find the link to an Amazon affiliate link that will send you to the Cantillon essay where you can buy the essay and read it. However, you do not need to buy that essay off of the Amazon link. You can go and get it for free at the Mises Institute just by typing in Cantillon essay on economic theory, and you should be able to find it right away. Now, once you have found that, go to chapters 6, 7, and 8. Part 2, 6, 7, and 8, probably the best chapters that you could ever read, talking about the increase and decrease of money to the state and further reflections upon that topic. And now, once you have internalized those 3 chapters, you are going to see how it is that domestic manufacturers can no longer compete with the foreign producers, and they start moving their manufacturing base out of the nation. The separation between the rich and the poor, the inequality grows, and the problems only get worse. Let's see. Let me see if I can find this here real quick, guys. Where's a little manuscript? Give me 1 second here, guys. I think I'm almost there. Okay, here we go. Okay, so what Cantillon is describing here, let me back it up just a little bit and read through this, because I think this is really important to understand. Understanding how politicians actually are not the issue. They are the symptom, right? So if you see politicians acting a fool, that's the symptom of the problem of an abundance of money in the state. Let me read it like this. When a state has arrived at its highest point of wealth, and I always assume that comparative wealth of a state consists mainly in their respective quantities of money, it will inevitably fall back into poverty by the ordinary course of things. And this is important. Like, once you have accumulated all the wealth and it doesn't increase anymore, like if you don't bring in new money, then you're going to fall back into poverty. And this is the case every single time. Will inevitably fall back into poverty by the ordinary course of things. Too great abundance of money, which gives power to the states so long as it lasts, throws them back imperceptibly, but naturally into poverty. Thus, it would seem that when a state expands by trade, and the abundance of money raises the price of land and labor, the prince or legislator ought to withdraw money from circulation, keep it for emergencies, and try to slow down its circulation by every means, and accept compulsion in bad faith to prevent its goods from becoming too expensive and avoid drawbacks of luxury. So what they are saying is that once you have increased all this money and the people get their hands on it and they start to increase their standard of living, what he is saying right here is that the states should do their best to prevent that from happening. All right? To keep the people from getting their hands on it, increasing their standard of living. They should be withdrawing the money. This is what he says the government should do. But they don't do that. However, it is not easy to perceive the opportune time for this, or to know when the money has become more abundant than it ought to be for the good and preservation of the advantages of the state. Right? You get all this money coming in because you're a producer, right? You're producing Saving Nation, producing the world's greatest stuff, pumping it out there to the world. The world is sending you their money. You start getting this money in. Where's the opportune time to say, okay, we got to stop you from moving into luxury? How do they know? They don't. There's no way of knowing. It's almost impossible to see that. People are working hard to try and get those products out there to the world. The world is sending the money. This is a good thing. Everybody's profitable. They're all working hard. You start increasing your standard of living, and then boom, into luxuries, and the problem begin, because now you're no longer competitive against the foreign producers. The foreign producers start sending their stuff to you, and you're sending them your money, and you eventually fall into poverty. All right? This is the problem that is being faced. Let me read it again. However, it is not easy to perceive the opportune time for this, or to know when the money has become more abundant than it ought to be for the good and preservation of the advantages of the state. Therefore, princes and heads of the republics do not concern themselves much with this sort of knowledge, and strive only to make use of the abundance of their state revenues to extend their powers and to insult other countries at the most frivolous pretexts. All things considered, working to perpetuate the glory of their reigns and administrations, and leaving monuments of their power and wealth, and perhaps the best they can do, and that is perhaps the best they can do, because according to the natural course of humanity, the state must collapse on its own. The politicians, only accelerate the fall a little. Nevertheless, it seems they should try to make their power last during the time of their own administration. They don't. This is the problem that was faced hundreds of years ago, and it's still the problem we face today. Okay? They only contribute to the fall a little. Us as industrious people, producing the world's greatest stuff, sending it out there to the world, and the world sending us their gold, is the problem that we ended up facing. We wanted to make use of the gold by raising our standard of living. We raised our standard of living with that use, and we started pushing our manufacturing out of the country. This wasn't something that was set up by a politician. It wasn't set up by a corporation. It wasn't set up by a banker. It was set up by the fact that it is an underlying economic force that was recognized by Cantillon hundreds of years ago, saying if you go down this road, if you produce, if you start becoming industrious, if you start getting abundance of money in, and you start raising your standard of living, you will not be competitive against foreign producers out there, and you will lose your manufacturing state or your manufacturing base to a foreign state due to the fact that you had moved into luxurious experiences. That's the problem we face nowadays. It's good stuff, right? All right, what time is it? All right, I got a few more minutes here. Let's go read this super chat from Terry Millie Boulevard. All right, $5. Thank you so much. Who's going to move into all these apartments going up? What are you talking about? There's plenty of people who want to buy houses, and they need to live in a place until they buy a house, so they're going to be moving into the apartments. This is going to happen. This is going to be a renter nation. Ownership of property is going to be a very difficult thing. The only way you're really going to end up doing it, if you're like an average everyday dude, who is trying to work like a 9-to-5 job to try and figure out how to become a property owner, the only way you're really going to end up doing it is to join forces with the corporations and get into institutional money and buy into like real estate investment trusts and stuff like that. Otherwise, to be an outright property owner is going to be such a difficult task, especially in a desirable area. It's like almost impossible. You know, with a 9-to-5 job, a good job ain't going to do it. It's not enough, right? I mean, Portland is like one of the worst cities in the entire country to try and buy a house with an average job. It's like one of the greatest divergence in, you know, pay to housing costs. All right. We need to see deflation for real estate owners. Inflation kills. Well, I mean, I understand that's probably what you need to see, but that's probably not what's going to happen, right? The separation between the rich and the poor is by property owners and capitalists. And if you are not moving your money into a capitalist position where you're going to get a return on your capital investment one way or the other, whether you're buying stocks, bonds, going into business, or doing something with it to get a return on that investment, then you're going to get left behind. If you're not moving into being a property owner, then you're going to get left behind. The more you try and work to have a good job that has a decent income, the more stressful and difficult it's going to be going into the future, because a good job isn't going to be enough. This is the problems that we face nowadays. Understanding it from the Cantillon effect, right, is probably going to give you the best understanding of why it's so difficult. You can't blame or expect a politician to change this when it's an underlying economic force that you're dealing with. Understanding the underlying economic force is going to give you the ability to then know, okay, what is it that I need to do to combat the issues that we are now facing? This is not easy for most people. How much time do I got here? All right, guys, I got like another 10 minutes here, if that. All right, the more property you have, the more loans you can get, the more property you can buy. Absolutely, it is. It's like, it almost like sends the inequality on a rocket ship. It's only going to get worse. Like, there's nothing that can be done to change it without pain and misery being inflicted upon the entire masses. The only position that they can do is new money coming into the system. And with new money coming into the system, there's going to be massive inequality. So which one do you want? Pain and misery or inequality? Those are the only two. You know, that's the only way it can go. Okay. Economy reset. Yeah, I don't think so. What reset? Yeah, I agree, Brody. All right, prices on homes are falling and should continue due to elevated rates. Yeah, but I disagree with that. I mean, we saw interest rates go up and we saw home prices go up. So, I mean, the idea of interest rates have been elevated going on 3 years now, right? 3 years, the prices have been elevated, and yet the home prices aren't dropping dramatically. Like, they dropped a lot, but even for like my own home, like I watched a significant amount of money come out of the ZELLE estimate of it. I was like, holy moly, talk about a house price drop. It's still where it is today is almost $50,000 more than what I had paid for it. All right. So it's just like, even though all this money had come out of it, out of the ZELLE estimate, it's still sitting at a stupid, ridiculously high price. Right? A price that I wouldn't be able to afford today. Yeah. All right. But now supply is at 2019 levels and increasing. All right. Nothing goes up forever. And that's where I'm trying to say, right? It did go up quite a bit, and it has come down, and it has been down at this level for months now. So I think the pressure relief has already taken place. And the idea of lower rates going into the future are more prominent in the narrative than higher rates. In fact, the more we push the inflation expectation up, the less restricted the economy gets, the more advantage those who are actually buying right now are getting within this economy that is so obscure to most people, they just don't recognize it. Like, most people think that we're in a very restricted economy right now with the Fed funds rate being elevated, but very few people take into consideration, especially those like, you know, too late Powell talking Trump saying that the Federal Reserve needs to lower rates. The very first question that somebody should say soon as they hear that is, where do you think the neutral interest rate is? Because if the neutral interest rate is rising ever closer to the Fed funds rate, it's as if the Fed is lowering rates. It has the same sort of impact on the economy. And it takes 6 months to a year to really feel the effects of an interest rate adjustment anyway. So there's a lag period to it. To say, look at the jobs numbers today, you need to act. Well, it's going to be a year before that impact really hits the economy, right? If you need to do something about an issue that is taking place right now within the economy, and the interest rate adjustment is the tool, you needed to do it 6 months to a year ago. And that's the important thing to also remember, is the lag effect that takes place from an the lag effect that takes place within the economy after the interest rate adjustment. So now, when we think about how it is that the elevated inflation expectation moves the neutral interest rate, there is still an accommodating or restrictive position that the Federal Reserve is holding that can either get stronger or weaker based on the expectations and give enough time into the future. The Fed can sit still and still make the economy less restricted by elevating the inflation expectations. Very few people understand this, and the people who are taking advantage of the situation right now are taking advantage of a situation within a less restricted economy than anybody had any anticipation of or even knew about. In my opinion, if the Fed was to lower rates, they would be chasing the neutral interest rate down. That means inflation expectation would be falling. People would be thinking that the prices wouldn't be moving up and that, you know, low interest rates is okay to put your savings into. People had that sort of feeling. The neutral interest rate would fall. The Federal Reserve would be chasing the neutral interest rate down. They may not be making the economy any more accommodating. People waiting for the interest rates to come down. This is the problem. People waiting for the interest rates to come down may be facing a Federal Reserve chasing the neutral interest rate down, not making the economy any more accommodating. It may be maintaining the restriction. This is like, it's so important to understand this because this is how the Federal Reserve is conducting themselves now. Very few people, 99.9% of the people will miss this. But if you go and study some of the things that Ben Bernanke was saying, Mike Woodford was saying, Larry Summers was saying 20 years ago, all this stuff makes sense because this is what they had predicted for their monetary policy. Once the Federal Reserve had put the Fed funds rate at zero, interest rate adjustments the interest rate adjustments was no longer the effective tool. They changed the way that they communicate. How they communicate is now the effective tool. And changing the neutral interest rate over time in relation to where the Fed funds rate is, that's how they are working it. Nobody sees it this way, but if you go and study the Federal Reserve and their speeches, they communicate this. They talk about it. We've broken it down many times here on this channel on exactly how it is that they are doing this and how they're using their words. How it is that they are deliberately using specific sentences in order to change asset prices. This is what's crazy about it. They know how to do it. They know how to use the mainstream media narrative to operate their monetary policy through perception. And it's not me, like, this is them saying it. Let me see if I can find it. Is this the one? Oh no. Here we go. This is coming directly from Philip Jefferson. Philip Jefferson, February 21st, 2025. Reading between the lines, textual analysis of central bank communications. This is incredible. Like, listen to these words and think about what it is that they are doing. Using textual analysis, high frequency asset price data, and high frequency central bank communication data, this research shows that investors' reactions to specific sentences communicated by the central bank are quickly incorporated into asset prices. Think about that. Specific sentences communicated by the Federal Reserve, right, by the central bank, are quickly incorporated into asset prices. They know how to do this. They know how to use the communication to use specific sentences and to change the asset prices. They have figured this out. And not only do they do it, but it is my opinion that they pay other economists to go out on the news channel and use those specific sentences to then push this idea. And again, this isn't me saying it. This is the Federal Reserve saying it, directly from the Federal Reserve. Philip Jefferson, member of the FOMC, a voting member of the Federal Open Market Committee, the people who vote on monetary policy. This is his words, not mine. All right. What else does he say here? Policymakers know that their communications are likely to affect the course of short-term interest rates, other asset prices, and associated economic outlook, resulting in an easing or tightening of financial conditions. See how these this is Philip Jefferson, not me, right? Philip Jefferson, voting member of the FOMC, the guy who is in charge of monetary policy, right? Not just Jerome Powell, but one of the other members of the voting party, right, of the FOMC. Policymakers know that their communications, they know their communications are likely to affect the course of short-term interest rates, other asset prices. They know their communications change the asset prices, right? And resulting in an easing or tightening of financial conditions. That's why I don't look at the interest rate adjustments anymore, because that's not the way they're easing or tightening the financial conditions. They're doing it through their communications, and he's admitting it right here, right? In fact, I can continue to break this thing down. Here, you want to hear more about it? Let me show you right here. More from Jefferson. He has this to say in a speech that he gave May 13th of 2024, communicating about monetary policy. Listen to this one. In 1981, Karl Brunner, the Swiss monetary economist, called central banking an esoteric art and lamented central banks' inherent impossibility to articulate its insight in an explicit or intelligible words and sentences. He basically saying that the Federal Reserve could not possibly communicate their strategy. They can't do it. It's impossible. An inherent impossibility to do this. At the time, central bank wisdom dictated that monetary policy makers should say as little as possible. Some research of the vintage tried to rationalize this secrecy through the notion that monetary policy would be particularly effective if it surprised the markets. That was in 1981. Their tune changed in the late 90s or in the mid 90s, right? Expectations became a focal point in academic and policy circles with the emergence of the new Keynesian models in the 1990s as a framework for monetary policy. In these models, aligning expectations of the decision makers, that's you and me, and the decisions that we make, whether or not we vote with our dollars, vote with our business, vote, whatever. We're the decision makers, right? We're the ones who are making these decisions. Aligning the expectations, our expectations of the decision makers in the private sector with those of the policymakers, that's the FOMC, the people who are in charge of monetary policy, aligning these, right? Policymakers produce superior economic outcomes. See, they started forward guidance, jawboning, telling the people what it is that they were planning on doing with their interest rates or their monetary policy before they actually did it, because they could get more power out of it. Mike Woodford, one of the developers of the new Keynesian model, put it this way: not only do expectations about policy matter, very little else matters. Right? This is how they're conducting themselves now, guys. Again, this isn't me making this stuff up. It is not me using my imagination. It's them saying it straight up that this is what they are doing. Alrighty, guys, this was a lot of fun. I really appreciate everybody coming out today. We got 365 people watching with 102 likes. Be sure and hit that like button. By hitting that like button, the YouTube algorithm will pick up the video, spread it around for more people to join in. Thank you so much for the $5 super chat. Your support of the channel is always appreciated. I can never do this without you guys. And that super chat is the way that you have an ability to support the Uneducated Economist by commenting right through the channel here. So I appreciate the super chats and the support for the channel. Thank you, everybody who has been going over to the podcast. I have just set up the podcast, so if you'd rather listen to these videos as opposed to watching them here on YouTube, you can go to the Uneducated Economist podcast and get the audio from that. And what else do we got going on? Patreon. Thank you, everybody who is becoming a member of the Patreon. I had a few people who have become a paid member and a few people who have taken the free membership, and I have been posting stuff there at Patreon here lately. I'm going to try and do it as much as I can. No promises, but it is a lot of fun to type out these articles and get them posted to Patreon. So thank you for the support over there at Patreon. All right, Uneducated Economist, you guys let me know.